Hello again, single moms and single dads. It's Toby, and back another week to talk to you about some single parenting, or I guess just in general parenting experiences that I've had, and hopefully that might bring up some conversation that we can have about it, or might help someone with some things that they might be going through currently. So, as I mentioned last week, I'll be bringing these videos to you each week, talking about things that I've experienced being a single mom to a now grown man. And hopefully you guys will be able to give me some questions down below that I can pick up on each week so that we can keep things moving along. I don't want it to be just all about me, even though it's kind of all about me. So just to clean up a little bit from last week when I talked about being the ultimate authority, I just want to make sure I was clear on the fact that I wasn't necessarily talking about discipline. When my son was out with my mom or my siblings or other relatives, they knew that they had my permission to check him if something happened. I don't mean that they could beat on him or anything like that, but if he misbehaved and in their presence, then they had my permission to give him a timeout, sit him down, talk to him about the behavior, make him apologize, whatever it was warranted for that thing that might have happened. They had my permission to talk to him about it. And then, of course, let me know. And then that was a whole other set of problems that he would have later dealing with me. So what I was talking about specifically was, and being the ultimate authority, was letting your son and people around him knew that they needed your permission to do things with your child, and that your child knew that he needed permission to do things, that he wasn't going to make decisions about things that were outside of his purview at whatever particular age he was. If he was 9, he couldn't make a decision on his own about seeing an R-rated movie. So those types of things. And because I had seen where there were groups of single moms kind of raising their kids together, and everybody's got their own way of doing things, but you have these kids that kind of become confused because they've got all of these people that they're calling mom, and they're all giving them different directions and different instructions and on life or how they should behave, and the kids end up not really listening to anyone, making their own decisions about what they're going to do instead of being able to say, this is the rule in our household. And so that's kind of what I was, hopefully that makes sense, what I was trying to express in my video last week about being the final authority. So not necessarily about discipline. We'll talk about that later. I, of course, don't want people, spanking on my son, but if he was misbehaving, they could address that. But if they wanted to take him out to the beach, they needed to talk to me because he had a lot of bronchial problems, and he couldn't go to the beach at night, and we live near the beach. And he did go one time because the parent didn't ask my permission, and they forgot about the bronchial situation, so they took him to the beach, and he developed pneumonia. He got very sick behind that because that wet air was not conducive to his health issues that he was having. So decisions like that, and he knew he wasn't supposed to go. He knew he should have spoken up, but he wanted to go with the other kids, and then he got sick. So just, those types of situations where parents should be involved, everyone knew this parent wanted to be involved. So, okay, so we'll move on from that and talk about this week, which kind of talks about kids don't know what they don't know. And NBC has that motto, the more you know. And a lot of times as parents, we think that our children are intuitively born knowing things, that they automatically are aware of certain things, and all of a sudden they become 10 or 15 or 18, and we say you're grown and you should know this and you should know how to do that. But as adults, we didn't intuitively or automatically know how to be parents, so we can't have that same expectation of our children. And so there's a lot of explaining and explanations and conversations, in my opinion, that need to be had about expectations and about behavior and about how things are to be done. And I kind of learned that in a very interesting way. Because my son Randall was born premature, he spent the first And in my small town, they didn't have a NICU. So when he was born, they had to ambulance him to a NICU in another small town about 40 minutes away. And he spent his first month there. His lungs weren't fully developed. He had haline membrane disease. And so they wanted him to be stable enough before he could go home. So it was maybe a week or 2 weeks or so that he was fed by a tube because he was in an incubator. And so once he slowly started coming off of that, and they allowed me to start feeding him with this little baby doll bottle, he didn't know how to suckle on the bottle. And I remember talking to the nurse about that, and she showed me how I had to teach him how to do that. There was a little pressure point underneath the chin, and my finger here here and underneath the chin, where I had to work with him so that he would learn how to do that, because I assumed that all babies were born learning how to do that. And since then, I've heard other parents say where they're not taken to the bottle or they're not taken to the breast, that they were having a problem with that sucking motion. And I remember my own son having that similar problem, and you think that he should have known that automatically. And so there are probably some other science behind that I'm not aware of, and I might not be explaining it clearly, but that to me just was kind of like a big clue that this kid, I don't know anything, and this kid doesn't know anything. So we have to figure out all of this together. So that kind of led me to maybe at times over explaining things to my son, but he always knew what environment he was going into, what the behavior was associated with that environment, what my expectations were for him as his parent in that environment, and then if there would be any consequences if there was bad behavior demonstrated during that time. So a good example for us is we go, probably it was like 3 or 4, we started going to the movies, maybe once a month, maybe twice a month. We lived in a small town. There was not a lot to do. So I love movies. I'm addicted to movies. So I started taking him with me to see, kid movies. And when I started taking him, I think he was 4. So I would sit down and explain, this is where we're going. This is how long it's going to last. This is the type of environment you will be in. It's going to be dark. People will be quiet. They'll be watching the movies. They might be eating, but, you have to be respectful of other people being there and wanting to listen. So you can't yell or scream or run up and down the aisles, So I talked to him about what happens in a movie theater, what he might see when he goes in the movie theater, and what my expectations for him would be in the movie theater. If he got scared or if he wanted to get up and leave or use the bathroom, he could whisper in my ear, or he could hold my hand, or whatever he needed to do to feel comfortable. So we talked about that. So, and then I let him know, how I wanted him to behave. And then I would always follow it up with, do you have any questions? And sometimes he would have questions and sometimes he wouldn't. And then I would always follow it up with, are you okay with that? Can you handle it? And he always said yes, even though sometimes I knew he might not be able to. And then I would say, okay, but if you can't, if you misbehave, or if this happens, then these will be the consequences. And I was always never let off on the consequences, even if it was something minor, like you can't, watch your favorite cartoon on Saturday. Even if it was something minor, I never let up on the consequences, because I wanted there to be consistency, and I wanted him to have that expectation and know that, and to make a conscious decision in his mind, even at 4, that if I do this, I know this is going to happen. So I'm choosing to do this, even though I know this will happen. And that's something that we started young and practice. Even today, when we have conversations about things that are going in his life, he'll say, well, I know if I do this, this is a possibility of what could happen. And so I'm still choosing to do this. And then he's making a conscious decision, and he knows what the outcome will be. So those are things that, I think sometimes we as parents miss, and I know I have missed it on several occasions with him, because I kind of forgot that. One of our biggest arguments when he lived with me from, well, not so much as an adult, but more as a teenager or late elementary school, early middle school, is that he, had a messy room all the time. It was just a mess. And he saw me clean and dust and vacuum and do all of my chores and make my bed in the morning. And his room just looked like a tornado hit it. And so I would always fuss at him about his room. And then I figured out one day that we probably had, even though he sees what I'm doing, I have not demonstrated that to them. He just sees the final result. We probably have different definitions of clean. So I set him down in his room. He had a little desk. I said, sit in this chair and watch me. So I went through and cleaned his entire room, and I told him each thing that I was doing. And why I was doing it and why I felt it was important. And while he's living with me, he has to think it's important too. So his room was clean. After that, if I said, go clean your room, he knew that we were using my definition of clean, not his definition of clean. Now that he's living on his own, I don't know what his definition is. It's not my business. But when he was living with me, if I said, go clean your room, and this was when he was younger, he, not as like in high school or anything, we didn't have those conversations, but when he was younger, if I would say, go clean your room, he knew that he had to use my definition of clean. And he would come out and he'd say, I'm done. And I said, okay, well, will I think it's clean or do you think it's clean? And sometimes he would say, okay, wait a minute. And he'd go back in and he's like, okay, now I'm done. So I had to, we had to have those conversations, and I had to stop thinking that he just automatically knew what I meant. He didn't know what he didn't know. And if he was going to a funeral, or if he was going to visit elderly relatives, or if he was going to play with his friends and he had a curfew, or he couldn't go, past certain sides of town, like we had to have a conversation about, this is what's going to happen. This is my expectation. Are you capable of doing this? Can you do this? Can you handle this responsibility? And if he said yes, then I gave him the opportunity to demonstrate that he could handle that responsibility. And if he could not, then there was always some consequence that would occur. And he knew going into the situation what that consequence would be. And so that was my attempt to battle peer pressure. One of the authors that I like to read, that I read a lot when he was younger, is Kwanzaa Kunjufu. And one of the books that he had talked about, which, pardon me, this is so old, it's got stains all over, but to be popular or to be smart. And it talks about battling peer pressure. And I always, I'm not saying that my son never did anything or didn't do his dirt out there with his friends, but in doing so, he was making a conscious decision that I'm going to do this, damn the consequences. And so, because he knew that there would be consequences. And so that's kind of when I say they don't know what they don't know, is we have to stop thinking that our kids automatically know this is good behavior or that's bad behavior, or this is how I should talk to someone, or that's how I should talk to someone. This is what my mom means when she says this, and maybe it's not exactly what mom means. We have to define things for them, give them as clear of an explanation as we can as to why this is occurring or what will be happening. Let them know what the expectations are for them. Maybe there's some latitude with that, and maybe there isn't. It depends on the situation. And then what the consequences will be outside of that if those guidelines are not adhered to. And it's not germane to every situation that this might come up, but there are instances where you have to clearly define that for kids, because if not, then they have no boundaries and they start to make their own rules, but without a base of knowledge to pull from. When they're elementary school or middle school kids, they don't have the life experiences that we do to be able to formulate their own decision making without a base to pull from. They can't say, well, the last time I did this is what happened, so maybe I should try it a different way. They haven't had that experience yet. So at those young, tender ages, then we have to help guide them. And as they get older and develop their own experiences, then they can make better informed choices. But when they're younger, we have to help them make those choices because they don't know what they don't know. If they have never, that's the example. I keep going back to the room, but that's really minor. But if they have not been to a funeral before and they don't know that people are going to be sad, and they might cry, or they might stand up, or they might fall over, and they might think that's funny, or they might get scared. they might cry. They don't know how to interpret that type of emotion. And so those instances where you have these conversations with the kids to let them know, this is where the environment you're going to be in, this is what you might see, and this is how I expect you to behave. And you need to be strong on that. If they get scared, if you don't, my son's been to funerals before and he's tapped me on the arm and he's tapping me like really fast, and I know he needs to get out of there. So that's happened when he was younger. And because I'm a single mom, I try to pull other guys into situations that I'm having. So it's not always just me being there for him. So it's a good friend of the family that was there, a male, and I whisper, say, hey, he needs to take a walk outside. Can you take him? I didn't want him to have to look at me while he was trying to process this, because then I'm going to start crying. It's not going to help the situation. So this guy was really nice. He took him outside. They walked around. He actually helped him set up the food for the repast, but he, so you have to be kind of aware of the environment, how things might affect them, and tell them you might experience this. You might see this, and this is okay. So I hope all that makes sense. I feel like I jumbled a lot in there. Basically, the kids don't know what they don't know. They aren't born knowing these things. They aren't born and then all of a sudden they turn 18 and you say, okay, you're grown, get out there and do it, handle it, get a job, start paying bills, and you haven't been talking to them about that since they were 13 or 14 or 15. They won't know. They won't know what to do in their flounder. So it's, you have to have those conversations with them, have to give them expectations, have to set boundaries, have to give them the foundation that they need to start making critical decisions on their own, and use critical thinking when they're out around people besides you, where you're not their comfort zone. So that's all I have for you this week. I still don't have a picture up. I'm working on it. I'm not that technically savvy. So I'm still working on that, but I'll have a picture up of the kid. That's what I call him. I'll have the picture up of me and the kid soon as I can. All right. So I will see you guys next week. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, we are more. Bye.